I read 10 Days, Martin Luther King Jr. by David Colbert. It is a very good book talking about just the 10 most important days of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. So it starts off by saying that segregation in America before Martin Luther King Jr. was horrible. But at his first day, Martin was 15 and he was on a bus. There was a white man who wanted his seat, but Martin did hated the segregation laws, so he sat there. And he sat there for 3 hours until he was finally put in jail for not moving out of the seat. And then when later on in life he would tell people this was the angriest day he had ever had. So day 2 spoke about how he moved to a new city with his new family, and they elected him to be the leader of their campaigns. And he was nervous because he didn't want to be in jail and put his family in danger, but he decided that he would fight against it. A couple days later, he did the bus boycott, which was he encouraged all African Americans to not ride the buses since they were 3/4 of their They were 3/4 of their income, the African Americans riding, and they didn't ride for a year and a half. But finally, they passed a law that meant all African Americans had to be treated equally on buses. There was one when he was in Birmingham jail that he had to write some letters called the Birmingham jail letters that he would later be submitted to the New York Times for the main reason why segregation in America was such a horrible thing. His 5th day was when he had his famous I Have a Dream speech, in which almost 1 million African Americans and whites attended, and it was said to be one of the most influential speeches in all of America's history. On the 6th day, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, but stuff was starting to get to him. The riots were riots starting, and they were becoming more violent. New leaders were coming out, such as Malcolm X, who decided that Martin Luther King Jr.'s ways of being non-violent were not good, and he said they had to take their freedom for themselves. A couple days later, day 8, they had a freedom march from Birmingham to Selma, in which almost 50,000 African Americans died because of tensions in America. And the riots started by African Americans were first of all, Martin was already starting to become depressed with all this anger and violence, but now he was seeing it have effects, such as laws that had already been passed were starting to be retracted because of all their violence. So he was starting to be depressed. And then on the 10th day, he was just out in his balcony. He had just did a speech for the Poor People's Act, which was African Americans could not get minimum wage as much as Caucasians could. So he decided to go on strike and change it with everyone. But after that, making that speech, the next day he was out on his balcony and was shot by James Earl Ray, who shot him, and a couple hours later he died in the hospital. And they said after his funeral, over 110 riots started out all over America, and just in New York alone, 711 fires had to be put out. And Then it's a couple of years later by Ronald Reagan made his specific holiday for Martin Luther King Jr. and all his contributions to America.